All right. Everybody hear me all right? I wondered what I would speak about, and I decided that I'm just going to go on a walk here tonight, and you're more than welcome to come along. And I think it's probably going to be about half preaching, half testimony, half confession, half reminiscing, half imagination, and half advanced theoretical mathematics. I hope by the end you'll catch whatever it is I'm throwing. If not, drop me a line. My father wasn't a church man, or even close to it, but he did have certain sayings that served me well. My favorite was when he would say, "You never miss the water till the well runs dry." And I loved that. I loved the wisdom of it. Of course, it caught me off guard the day that I realized that it applied to him. But his favorite to me was, "You're all the man you'll ever be." You're all the man you'll ever be. His way of calling me higher, stronger, bigger, braver. William Barclay, one of my favorite illustrations, William Barclay says that he rode the train into London every day. And every day he passed a little white cottage that was set against the lush greens and browns of the English countryside. And he says he was amazed at how white, how sparkling those who lived there kept it. And then the snow fell, and the little cottage was anything but white. Every blemish was exposed. At any given moment, I suppose that we can appear to be better, to be braver, to be more intelligent, to be kinder, to be more compassionate, more loving, simply by choosing the correct candidate to compare ourselves against. The problem is, around 2,000 years ago, the snow fell. So that we now know that the question is not going to be, were you as good as your neighbor? Were you as good as your colleague? Were you as good as your friends, your spouse, your family? The question is, were you as good as Christ? Which now only affords us one question. But who then will rescue us from this body of death? Long lay the world in sin and error, pining, till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, The weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Love that song. I'm tempted when asked, what do you think the best song ever written was? I'm tempted. And when David Phelps sings it, and if you haven't heard that, find it on YouTube. Even after the 100th hearing, it still catches my heart off guard. I love the song, the truth. It's truth beyond truth. But there's a side to his appearing that is wholly unpleasant. There's a side to his appearing that's inglorious, whereby the very sight of him forces the convicted of heart to look for the first rock to crawl under, or repeat what Peter said, away from me. I don't need a video of me playing basketball to realize how far short of the standard I fall. 10 minutes watching Michael Jordan will do it. And I think I'm golfing well, with a few straight drives and a couple of impressive putts. And then I watch the Masters. And I can't be the only one who's always questioning, wondering what it's really all about. I think I have a sense of it, where the emphasis should lie, and then I hear something else, see someone else, and it begins to shift, and I no longer know where everything fits. I don't understand the correct balance, how any of it can ever possibly make sense. Those moments it all gets thrown up into the air again. And if it does make sense, what's my role in it all? And if there is a role for me to play, then I'm praying that my past performances aren't taken into account when I'm going to be considered for the part. So if you're like me, not raised in the church, with very few spiritual or biblical influences, in fact, the only Bible in our house was the big picture children's Bible that I had to ask for when I was, I must have been around 8 or 9, taking my parents wholly by surprise. And it still causes me to this very day to cast my mind back, because I can't remember why I asked for it. I wasn't a bad kid, but I was leagues away from the average church kid. And I don't have many memories from childhood, and I don't know why that is either. Others seem to have hundreds that they can recall at will. I've got a few, but one of the most prominent memories I have is this children's Bible. And I would flick, as clearly as I'm seeing you now, I would flick back and forth between two stories. And the first one was the cross, a wonderfully illustrated double-page spread of the crucifixion. And the words underneath, seeing how he died, the centurion said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." And without anyone telling me anything about Jesus, I remember vividly to this day the chills that I felt when I'd read that. And the other story I loved was Samson. Oh, I loved Samson. Still do. Two biblical people, I'm convinced, came from Scotland. Peter, for obvious reasons, and of course Samson. a man's man, a man men could admire. You know, we have those men. We have men, of course, and then we have men's men. Soldiers, military, firemen, farmers, upon whose back sits the progress of the world. Samson, like Peter, first to draw his sword. I'd love it. I love it. First to draw the sword in honor to keep his vow that he would die with Jesus. First out of the trench. Gotta love that. Hasty, perhaps, but brave. Missing the entire point as to how the kingdom of God was to advance. But brave. Brave and honest. Can you beat that in a man? They're almost synonyms. Honest enough to know that he didn't deserve to be in the presence of Jesus. Brave enough to jump over the side of a boat to try and stand on water. Everybody freaks out that Jesus did it. If Jesus couldn't do it, we'd be in big trouble. Peter did it. And then at the end of John's Gospel, Jesus appears on the scene again. And as soon as he realizes who it is, he's over the side of the boat. They're only 100 yards from shore. I genuinely can't think of too many situations in life where if the rubber was hitting the road, I'm looking for a Peter or a Samson. I've never heard anyone in a crisis screaming for a preacher. I think prosperity, with all the blessings that it's brought us, has afforded us the luxury of ridiculing masculinity. And it isn't only our sons that are now paying the price, our daughters are too, because they can't find a man for want or money. But Samson, here's a man. Of course he was flawed, but at least he was a flawed man. Plenty of others in Scripture who, along with their flaws, appear to have traded in their masculinity also. But if it's masculinity we're looking for, where else would we look than Jesus? I know it's speculation as to what Jesus must have looked like, but this I know. A man who can undergo a scourging after having been up all night being slapped around, who can still have the strength to carry a cross until he buckles under it. A man who, whilst carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and the skin falling off his back, can stop on the way to the cross in order to comfort and preach to some grieving woman. A man who, whilst being attached to the cross, still has the wherewithal to appeal for mercy on behalf of the ones who are doing it to him. A man who, whilst on the cross, presides over an adoption ceremony. And then he waits 3 hours for the guy next to him to convert. And then hangs around another 3 hours so that a certain centurion could look long and hard and reach the correct conclusion, seeing how he died. I don't know a lot about Jesus. I know this: he must have been built like the side of a house. which of course is what would have given his words about compassion and mercy so much power. There's no power in turn the other cheek if the one preaching it looks as though they have no other choice in the matter. It's the strength and the power of the silverback gorilla that causes us to gasp when we see him gently lifting his little ones and playing with them. No one's amazed when a poodle does it, because a poodle's incapable of anything else. It's because we know what the lion can do that makes us laugh when we watch him tolerating all the little cubs falling over his head and biting at his tail. I wish we'd done a better job at presenting Jesus in a way that men found attractive, particularly men's men. But by the average gender in our pews, it appears we failed there. To me anyway, quite fantastically. And it's surprising to me that given that Jesus was a common labourer, how few common labourers I've seen. It was an uphill battle in Scotland to convert men's men to Christ. And I found that the majority of that was because they perceived Jesus to be something of a fairy, a weakling, delicate. Wonder where they could have got that idea. If we present Jesus, perhaps like some of the Renaissance paintings portray him, you know, dainty, fragile, with all these lovely pastel colours, a Jesus who looks as though he'd have trouble fighting a mild breeze, never mind a dragon, then our pews are self-explanatory. And you can hardly blame the aristocracy. What were they going to do? What paintings were they going to commission? Hey, I want you to paint a picture of Jesus. I want you to make him look like a stonemason, a carpenter, a labourer. They're never going to do that in a million years. Why would they? That would only have exposed their femininity. Much easier to paint Jesus to look like me than require of myself to become a man like Jesus, strong, resolute, honest, brave, true. So the upside of me having, that's where I was going, the upside of me being the only Bible reader in my house, the upside for my parents was that whenever the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses arrived, I was the one thrown down the stairs to deal with them. And I didn't mind. Of course, I didn't know what a doctrine was. I was just happy someone was talking about God. So, with relatively little Bible in my background, when God did appear, my late teens, early 20s, it was all very sudden and explosive and exciting, but overwhelming. Something I thought would subside as time went on, but instead it's only increased. And I don't like it. I don't like it. And yet I can't steal myself away from him. And it took me quite a long time to even begin to find my feet. In the church, it looked as though everyone else had had been there all their life and knew everything. And I must confess that outside of the Gospels, you know, when the preachers would preach their lessons, anything outside of the Gospels held very little interest for me. I was content to believe that I'd learned everything I needed to learn about the Old Testament by watching the Ten Commandments a few times. The prophets and the history of Israel bored me to tears. And the Psalms, what? They didn't even rhyme. And then because the RSV was the Bible at the time at the church, I didn't even go near Paul. I think I tried one of his sentences one time, and 3.5 months later I gave up. Still hadn't got to the end of it. He made very little sense to me. His sentences were too long. So to the Gospels I ran. And although I knew that I should get out more in regard to Scripture, I couldn't really think of a good reason why. Well, there's things outside of the Gospels that would help you appreciate Jesus even more. Yeah, I know, but it means not looking at him for a while. Why would I want to do that? Jesus has always fascinated me. The little snippets that I got at school, I don't know why. I don't know why he fascinated me. No one encouraged it. No one. No family, no friends, no relations, no neighbors. The only theology I got was from my grandmother, who insisted that if I kept behaving the way I was, then I'm going to the bad fire. That was my theological training. I didn't even know anyone who went to church. And I only went on occasion so that I could play football. And yet Jesus always fascinated me. Still does. And the more I look, and you'll know this to be true, the closer I look, the more difficult it becomes to define him. The more majestic he appears to be. And the one I love the most is overwhelming. I don't like that. I don't like it. I don't like being overwhelmed. I don't like it. And yet I kept looking. He gives a man back his sight. Gives a blind man his sight. I love the miracles, as Billy Connolly would call them, those holy tricks. I love the miracles. He gives a man back his sight. And at the entry level we see the great physician, a kind man helping an unfortunate man. Lovely. But because it seemed obvious to me that Jesus must have surely passed more sick people than he healed, I could only conclude that mere physical healing was not the purpose of arrival. Impressive as it was, and that's only confirmed when he starts rebuking people for wanting these type of signs. And then he feeds 5,000. He doesn't stay in the lane. Did you notice? He doesn't stay in a lane. Ten minutes later, he's feeding 5,000 people with a packed lunch. But given the financial climate of the first century, he obviously passed about 50,000 who were also hungry. and gave them nothing. So he wasn't here to open a soup kitchen. He wasn't here to socially reform the world, although by him the world would socially be reformed, but he wasn't driven by some ideological utopia that if we just had everything we needed, everything would be all right. I'm pretty sure that he understood that it was from paradise that we had fallen. And then he's calming a sea. My little brain, I'm not saying love me, I'm thick, okay? But my little brain, he wouldn't stay in a lane. He still won't stay in a lane. Now he's calming the sea. And he's rebuking people for wanting to see what it is that he's doing. Now he's standing in the middle of a boat, in the middle of a lake, in the middle of a storm, in the middle of the night. What's the point? He likes middles. Thankfully, God brought into my life some midfielders. I was a goal scorer in soccer. A goal scorer. I did it really well, but I'm not doing anything else. I'm not running the length of my arm for a ball that you could have passed to me. All the midfielders, I loved them. They did all the grunt work. I've found the same to be true in theology. God's been kind enough to supply me with friends that midfielders that have a back for all the hard work, the digging. And because of them, the grand narrative began to come into view, and pieces of it all started sliding together. Because what happens when he gives a man back his sight, and someone brings to our remembrance the first words God ever speaks? Let there be light. What happens when someone asks us to consider the miracle in view of a multitude of Hebrews emerging from the darkness of Egypt? Suddenly the hairs on the back of our neck begin to twitch. What happens to the feeding of the 5,000 when someone encourages us to remember God miraculously feeding another bunch of wandering, hungry pilgrims whilst talking about some far-off promised land? And what happens to Galilee when we recall the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, bringing order to an otherwise chaotic, empty, void, dark world? And very quickly, it becomes clear this wasn't just a man. Oh, he's man. But he's not just a man. This was a man apparently reliving the entire content of Jewish history. He isn't simply teaching about creation and the Exodus. He isn't simply referencing Adam or Israel. He is the creation. He is the Exodus. He is the genuine Adam, the true Israel, the prophet of prophets. Fall on your knees. And I began to see that what I had initially been taught, namely to zero in on the text, to separate the chapters into paragraphs, the paragraphs into verses, the verses into sentences, the sentences into words, although containing something of value, only seemed to bore me. And unless I'm greatly mistaken, bored everyone else around me. And the big picture I was noticing didn't only thrill me as a child, it was thrilling me now as an adult. And there were less people asleep on the pews when that particular song was being sung. What happens when you don't separate and isolate the miracles? What happens when you view them as a whole? And it quickly dawns on us that there's a reason that this Adam is quite unlike all the rest, and it's not even close. In fact, the curse that the first Adam invited upon all of us, with its sickness and illness and toil and even death, we begin to see that that curse has no effect in the presence of this young Galilean. Everywhere he set his foot, the curse is running, screaming like a scolded dog. Demons are on their knees, begging him for mercy. And it wasn't even that he was defeating the curse, he was reversing it. He wasn't simply putting out the darkness, he was bringing in the light. Light and life, praise and joy. We're all standing where misery reigned just 5 minutes ago. And when we look at the Gospels, it's almost as though it looks like there's a whole new creation standing right in the middle of ours. Here he was, bringing light where darkness only prevailed, providing food without an ounce of sweat from his brow, bringing life where death had already planted its flag. And the way he was doing it, not only was he doing it, the way he was being a man. Profound confidence. Him against the world. Knowing he was winning. Without a hint of arrogance. Profound courage. But no bravado. Strength without coercion. Accomplishment without pride. Miracles with no fanfare. Learning, knowledge, wisdom. Not all puffed up and conceited. Dripping with humility. And the closer we look, the worse it gets. Maybe you're different. I decided to confess some of this tonight in case you thought it was only you. Overwhelming is the understatement. Bioluminescence, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, or maybe you've just saw it on TV. Bioluminescence. At certain times in the world, given the correct conditions, in certain parts of the world, if you reach your hand into the ocean and touch it, or wade into it from the beach, everything around you begins to glow. It's as though the water's on fire, and the more waves you make, the brighter it all becomes. This, I found, is the mess that I got myself into with the Bible. Or maybe you've walked along the docks and you see these great ships all tied up, aircraft carriers tied to the docks by by ropes that are thicker and wider than you are. And then you look closer and you realize it's not a rope at all. It's 4 ropes, 4 or 5 different ropes, themselves huge ropes, all entwined around each other. And then you look closer and each of those ropes is made up of 10 smaller ropes that are each made up of 20 different strands. And then 9 weeks later, you finally get down and find a single thread and forget why you were looking in the first place. This, I chose this. The unscratchable itch, the forever wandering rainbow, the unfindable pot of gold, the indefinable, insurmountable, incomprehensible, that on every side, and here's where it gets bizarre, whatever you can get a hold of is absurd, scandalous. The whole story is a joke, and it's an insult to mild intelligence if it's not true. And in answer to the great why, God comes back with, why? Because I love you. No. No. I'm sorry, but that's unacceptable. Because there's no way that something as holy as he insists that he is, can love so profoundly someone like me. That's outrageous. He's mocking us. If it isn't true. And even if he did love us, there's no way he would demonstrate it the way that he did. Overwhelmed. I was confessing to Joey last week about my limitations in theology. They're not hard to find, but namely that I very quickly become overwhelmed. I remember back in the days when we were recording and taking demo tapes down to London. I was in a band, I was the singer, songwriter, and we got a new drummer, and and we brought to him one of what we thought was our best songs so that he would join us. And we finished playing the song. He was a great drummer, Davey, his name, solid. But we finished the song and then we looked over to him and he said, "Oh man, I think I'm going to have to go and lie down." Which was very complimentary. It was funny. It was more funny than complimentary at the time, that the song was so good that he had to go and lie down. That's how I feel when I pick up a book. I can't get past a page sometimes, not even a page, and my mind is all over the place. Or watch a good movie that illustrates God. And more so when I listen to those whose sandals I'm not fit to untie. More often than not, I really want to interrupt when they're speaking and just say, "You're as well not saying anything else because I can't carry anything else." But, and here's the rub, it's not the message. that weighs me down. It's not the difficulty or complexity sometimes of the arguments. It's not the volume of information at hand. It isn't even the clash or the collision of the narratives as they all come together weaving this magnificent tapestry. All of that is overwhelming, but that I can handle. What I can't handle is the size of it all, the width and the breadth and the depth and the height of God himself, the sheer magnitude of him. One minute an Iceman is helping a poor man to see. 1 minute a few thousand people are being fed. 1 minute there's a storm at sea. And the next minute, before I can take a breath, the entire creation narrative, the fall, the flood, the competing Adams, the Exodus, they're all banging down my door at the same time, demanding to be simultaneously considered. And they're all saying the same thing. Behold your God. Look at him. And I would love to. And the worst thing of all, here's the worst thing of all. I watch someone like Jim struggling to find adequate vocabulary to describe what he's seeing, whilst he is freely confessing that he's still chipping away at the tip of the iceberg. So I know it's not going to get any better for me. I don't know why I'm in the fight. Because although it thrills me, and it does, it thrills me in places I didn't even know existed, it tires me. I'm not good at it. And I am most certainly not built for it. You might think I am because you get to hear me once every 6 months. And maybe I do a half decent job. I'm not trying to pretend, but that's not me. That 20 minutes that you see is everything I got pulling together at the same time. It's easier just to turn out the light, find a path of less resistance, wallow in whatever it is that appears to be familiar and welcoming, and pretend that I didn't see what I know I just saw. To try and forget that I now know what I just heard to be true. And as I lie there on my bed, as I go to have to lie down, having just caught a glimpse, I haven't even heard him. I just hear about him. And I lie there on my bed, and I feel the mattress depress. You know that feeling when you're lying in your bed and you know someone's just sat down beside you? And in the quietness, he says, "Is that too much? Billy, was that too much? Too much at one time?" And I'll say to him, "It's not your fault. It's just that when the snow falls, my little cottage doesn't look so good. And I know you're trying to help me. None of that is lost on me. I know your intentions are pure. I know you have my best interest at heart. But the truth is, the better you appear to be, the worse I look. And it's sore. It hurts. And I don't want to be a wimp about it. I want to be a man. But it's sore. And then you ask me to tell other people about this, whilst knowing what I am. And so along with having my mind exploded, my body exhausted, and my heart wrenched open, I get to add feelings of blatant hypocrisy into the mix. You're asking too much. And he might say, as he often has, not audibly, you understand. I'm not hearing voices. I just want to make that clear in case you thought I was over-medicating. But he does say it. Billy, when I watched you reading that children's Bible, the first things I ever burned into your heart, what were your favorites? And I'll say, Samson and the cross. And he'll say, all those years. And it didn't even dawn on you that it's the same story. It's all the same story. This man who could kill 1,000, brave, strong, with the jawbone of an ass, despised and rejected soul, taking all that he had, bringing down the gods, demolishing the structures. Billy, the woman with the 2 copper coins, all she had to live on. What's happening there? Billy, why would my son have paid such close attention to that? And why would my spirit have ensured that her memory live on? What is she doing? This social outcast, this husbandless, at the end of a rope, with more pennies to her name than the common sense it would take to use that money and feed her children. And yet she takes them and donates them toward the corruption of the temple. What's she doing, son? What is she doing? What is she doing if she isn't taking everything that she had, which wasn't much, but it was pleasant and it was holy in my sight, taking everything that she had and driving it right into the heart of that dragon? Your other favorite, Billy, what is it? And I'll say, you know what it is. David and Goliath. It's every little boy's favorite. You'll say, what do you see, Billy? You don't see a young man there upon whose throne my son now sits, a young man running his fingers over the edge of a stone, taking all that he had, all that he was, in fact, rejecting when someone tried to add to him. 9 foot, armed to the teeth, thighs as round as David himself, beast. This dragon who dares to taunt my people. And what? A stone. A stone. And these days he started telling me, Billy, you have children now. You know you don't have to be impressive to impress me. The exalted things of this world are coming down, son. God says, look at that room. Look at that room. And with this, I'll be off. This is the last thing I'm talking to you about. He says, look at the room. And I say, what room? He says, there. Right there. Jerusalem. I said, all right, I see it. He says, Peter and John arrived about 40 minutes ago to tell everybody they don't know where the body is. It's gone and they don't know where it is. Mary arrived 5 minutes ago to tell them the body isn't gone and she does know where it is. Look at that room, son. Look at them. Look at that little gathering of people. So afraid. Overwhelmed. So confused they actually think a locked door is going to save them from the power of Rome. That little room is going to bring Rome to her knees. And then God gets up to leave. And I say, hey, I was enjoying that. Finish the story. And he looks back at me and he smiles. You know that smile? You know that smile that he has? That one. He looks back at me and he says, finish the story. Haven't you been listening, son? You are the story. You tell it. And then just before he closes the door on the way out, he turns and he says to me, you're all the man you'll ever be. That's all I got.